It was supposed to be the happiest week of her life. The flowers were chosen, the dress fitted perfectly, and the invitations had already gone out. But 3 days before she was to walk down the aisle, she vanished. At first it looked like cold feet, a nervous bride running away from the altar. But when her blood was found near a lake, miles from her home, everything changed. Her name was Lydia Harper, 28 years old, a woman everyone described as sunshine in human form. Her smile could light up a room, and her laughter echoed like someone who truly believed in love. She had finally found the man she'd been waiting for, Ethan Cole, a charming financial consultant who seemed to adore her. They met in the most romantic way imaginable, at a friend's wedding. He was the best man, she was the maid of honor. Two people who locked eyes across the room and never looked away again. For 2 years, their relationship was everything Lydia had dreamed of. Weekend trips, family dinners, endless affection. To everyone around them, Ethan and Lydia were the couple that defined perfection. But perfection has a way of hiding cracks. And behind Ethan's calm smile, there was something else, something no one, not even Lydia, saw coming. 3 days before their wedding, Lydia called her sister Emily in tears. She didn't say much, only that she had seen something she couldn't ignore, and that she needed to talk to Ethan that night. That was the last time anyone heard from her. When Lydia didn't show up for her bridal makeup appointment the next morning, her family panicked. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her car was missing. And Ethan, the man she was supposed to marry, told police he hadn't seen her since the previous evening. He claimed they had a small argument about wedding plans, that she needed space. But police noticed something off about him, a calmness that didn't match the moment. And then came the first twist. Security footage from a gas station 20 miles from Lydia's apartment showed Ethan's car at 2:47 a.m. In the passenger seat, a woman with Lydia's build slumped against the window. But when police found the car 2 days later, Lydia was gone. All that remained was a faint trace of blood on the seat, a torn piece of her wedding dress fabric, and a receipt for a motel room booked under Ethan's name. The fairy tale had turned into a nightmare. But this wasn't just a case of cold-blooded murder. It was the unraveling of a life built entirely on lies. And as investigators dug deeper, they discovered that Ethan Cole, the loving groom-to-be, wasn't who he said he was. He had another life, another woman, and another wedding just weeks before Lydia's. Evil hides in plain sight, and stories like this prove it. If you crave the truth behind the darkest crimes, don't just watch, subscribe to Crime Vault, because the next story might be closer than you think. When detectives began piecing together Ethan Cole's story, nothing quite added up. His timeline was inconsistent, his emotions seemed rehearsed, and while Lydia's friends described him as the perfect fiancé, his phone records painted another picture, one filled with late-night calls, hidden transactions, and a second phone registered under a false name. At first, investigators thought it might be a harmless secret, maybe another woman, maybe debt. But what they found next was far from harmless. On the second phone, detectives uncovered dozens of messages between Ethan and a woman named Rachel Moore. Messages filled with affection, promises, and something far more disturbing: plans for a future that didn't include Lydia. Rachel wasn't a stranger. She lived just 2 towns away, and she had no idea Ethan was engaged to someone else. When police visited her home, she was shocked.
She told investigators she had been dating Ethan for over a year. He had told her he was divorced, that Lydia was just a business partner. He even introduced Rachel to his family, using Lydia's engagement ring money to buy her gifts. To Rachel, Ethan was a man rebuilding his life after heartbreak. To Lydia, he was the love of her life. To investigators, he was starting to look like a con artist with blood on his hands. Detectives dug into his background and found that Ethan Cole wasn't his real name at all. His birth name was Daniel Evans, a man with a sealed record in another state for fraud, identity theft, and insurance manipulation. He had reinvented himself. New city, new job, new love story. But as always with men like Ethan, the truth eventually clawed its way to the surface. The day before Lydia disappeared, she withdrew $18,000 from her savings account, money she had been keeping for their honeymoon. Her sister said Lydia told her she needed it for something important. That same day, Ethan's second phone pinged near a remote lake area at 10:22 p.m., the same area where Lydia's blood was later discovered. It was clear now. Lydia had found out the truth. She had discovered Ethan's secret life and confronted him, and that confrontation turned deadly. Still, detectives had no body, no weapon, no confession. Without those, it was still just a missing person case, one that Ethan continued to publicly mourn. He cried in front of cameras. He begged for her safe return. He even offered a $50,000 reward, money he never actually had. But his act didn't fool everyone. Lydia's mother said she never saw pain in his eyes, just calculation, like a man rehearsing a role he had played too many times before. Then came the break police had been waiting for. A fisherman near Pine Lake called authorities after discovering a suitcase half buried along the waterline. Inside, torn bridle lace, a lock of hair, and a small silver necklace engraved with the words, "Forever yours, E." DNA confirmed what everyone feared. It was Lydia's. The fairy tale was dead, and the man who was supposed to love her for life had become her executioner.
The morning after the fisherman's discovery, police moved swiftly to arrest Ethan Cole, or Daniel Evans as they now knew him. But when detectives arrived at his apartment, it was empty. No clothes, no electronics, no sign of struggle, only a stripped mattress and a faint smell of bleach. He had vanished, just like Lydia had weeks earlier. On the kitchen counter, officers found a single folded note written in neat, deliberate handwriting. 5 words. It was never just me. The meaning was clear. Someone else had been involved, someone who knew Lydia, someone close enough to help hide a murder. Detectives combed through Ethan's digital trail, his burner phones, emails, financial accounts, searching for any connection that could explain his escape. Then a transaction caught their eye. 2 days before Lydia disappeared, Ethan had wired $5,000 to a woman named Melissa Crane, a co-worker at his firm. At first, it looked like a random payment, but surveillance footage told another story. The night Lydia vanished, Melissa's car was seen following Ethan's truck toward Pine Lake. Her vehicle returned 2 hours later without him. Detectives brought her in for questioning. At first, Melissa denied everything, said she barely knew Ethan, that she only handled his payroll forms. But when confronted with the footage, her hands began to shake. She asked for a lawyer. Then, quietly, she said 3 words that changed everything. "I didn't kill her." Her story unraveled like a nightmare. Melissa confessed that Ethan had approached her weeks earlier, spinning a tale about his abusive fiancée and how he feared for his life. He told her Lydia was unstable, controlling, and threatening to ruin him financially. He said the only way out was to make her disappear. Melissa claimed she thought it was just talk, until Ethan offered money, $5,000 in cash. All she had to do was drive his truck back from Pine Lake. She agreed. But the next morning, when she saw Lydia's face on the news, she realized the truth. And Ethan's charm turned into terror. He told her to keep quiet, or she'd join Lydia next. When detectives asked where Ethan was now, Melissa hesitated. Then she whispered, "He said he was going somewhere no one would ever look." A multi-state manhunt began. Airports were alerted, Border Patrol notified, and every hotel within 50 miles checked. But it was as if Ethan had dissolved into thin air. Until a tip came in from a small coastal town 4 hours away. A motel clerk remembered a man checking in under a fake name, same build, same tattoo on his wrist. He'd been staying there for a week with a woman. Detectives raced to the scene. Room 107, door slightly open. Inside, 2 coffee cups, a packed suitcase, and an open passport on the bed. The name on it wasn't Ethan Cole or Daniel Evans. It was Lydia Cole. He had stolen her identity. He was planning to flee the country as the woman he murdered. Before officers could lock down the area, he slipped out the motel's back door and vanished into the night. It was clear now Ethan wasn't running from guilt. He was running toward his next deception. And just when investigators thought the nightmare couldn't get darker, they discovered something buried deep in his past that would expose an even older crime.
When detectives started digging into Ethan Cole's true identity, Daniel Evans, the past unfolded like a crime scene frozen in time. He wasn't new to vanishing acts. He had done it before. Back in 2014, long before Lydia or the fancy engagement, Daniel lived in another city with another woman. Her name was Clara Jameson. She was a nurse, quiet, devoted, and hopelessly in love. Their neighbors called them inseparable. Until one night, Clara disappeared. Police back then found no evidence of foul play, only an empty apartment and Daniel's calm explanation. She left. She couldn't handle commitment. Weeks later, he sold her car, emptied her savings, and vanished himself. The case went cold. No trace of Clara Jameson was ever found. Now, years later, Lydia's murder had reawakened Clara's ghost. Detectives reopened the old file, and what they found was hauntingly familiar. Same pattern, same lies, same charming man, and the same promise of love that ended in silence. They began piecing together a timeline. Daniel Evans had a pattern, targeting women who were independent but emotionally vulnerable. He would study them, charm them, then build a relationship grounded in manipulation. Once he gained access to their finances, their homes, and their trust, he vanished, leaving devastation in his wake. But this time, he didn't just vanish. He eliminated the witness. Detectives suspected Lydia had discovered the truth about Clara. Maybe she found an old photo or a message he forgot to delete, something that made her realize the man she was about to marry wasn't who he claimed to be. To the outside world, Ethan Cole was a devoted groom preparing for a new life. But behind closed doors, Daniel Evans was a fugitive trying to erase every trace of his past. The FBI's behavioral analysis unit built a profile, labeling him a narcissistic sociopath with predatory control tendencies. In simple terms, he didn't just lie for gain, he lied because he enjoyed it. Detectives traced his movements across 3 states, each time finding evidence of his trail, small, deliberate, and chilling. In one rental storage unit registered under his alias, they found women's jewelry boxes, engagement rings, handwritten love letters, all from different women, each labeled neatly in a small brown folder with dates. Clara, Anna, Lydia. It wasn't just a love story gone wrong. It was a collection of lives destroyed by one man's obsession with control. When asked why he'd keep trophies, one investigator said quietly, "Men like him don't keep things for memory. They keep them for power." But the question that haunted everyone was, where was Daniel now? Then, a new lead. A call from a hardware store clerk in a small border town. A man matching Daniel's description had come in 2 days earlier, buying a shovel, duct tape, and fake ID supplies. Security cameras confirmed it. He was still alive. Still planning something. Authorities realized the nightmare wasn't over, it was just beginning again. Because for a man like Daniel Evans, starting over wasn't escape, it was addiction. And his next victim might already be standing in his shadow.
Months passed. Daniel Evans, the man once known as Ethan Cole, had become a ghost. Interpol notices went out. His photo plastered across digital boards and crime shows. Yet there were no confirmed sightings, no movements on his credit cards, no calls, no trace. Until 6 months later. A woman in a small coastal town reported something strange. A charming new neighbor had moved into the rental beside hers. Friendly, polite, the kind of man who remembered birthdays and fixed people's mailboxes. He said his name was Adam Lewis. He claimed to be a freelance writer working on a book about lost love. And to everyone around him, he seemed harmless, even perfect. But beneath that calm, Daniel was quietly rebuilding his web. He started attending the same church as his neighbor, Grace Miller, a single mother of 2 who had recently lost her husband in an accident. She found comfort in Adam's kindness, his gentle words, the way he always seemed to understand her pain. Within weeks, he was having dinner with her family, reading bedtime stories to her children, fixing her car. He blended into their lives seamlessly, as if he had rehearsed the part 100 times before. Grace's best friend later told investigators that she once saw Adam sitting alone in his car outside his house, whispering to himself, repeating words she couldn't hear. He looked distant, detached, almost rehearsing. And then, one night, Grace's daughter mentioned something that chilled her mother to the bone. "Mommy, why does Mr. Adam have a box with a lady's picture in it? The lady looks like you, but she's wearing a wedding dress." Grace didn't understand, but curiosity led her to the garage the next morning, where she found a locked box under a tarp. Inside were photos, ID cards, and jewelry, and one newspaper clipping. Bride-to-be found dead, fiancé missing. The picture was of Lydia. Grace froze. Her hands trembled as she whispered the name she read aloud. Ethan Cole. It was then she realized she'd been living next door to a killer. She called the police immediately, and within hours, the small town was surrounded. Federal agents, local officers, SWAT. They were determined not to let him disappear again. When Daniel returned home that night, he saw the flashing lights and tried to run, but it was too late. Officers tackled him near the back alley, dragging him down as he screamed, "You don't understand! She deserved it! They all did!" His face was cold, unmoved, almost proud. In his car, police found another packed bag, cash, and 2 fake passports, one in Grace's name, one in his. He had been planning to vanish again, this time with a new victim. When interrogated, Daniel refused to speak.
not a single word. Until one detective placed Lydia's engagement photo on the table and said quietly, "She trusted you." That's when Daniel smiled for the first time and whispered, "So did Clara." The silence in that room was heavier than any confession, because now detectives knew there were more victims than they'd ever imagined. And the real question wasn't how many women he killed, but how many still believed he was alive. For days after his arrest, Daniel Evans, known to some as Ethan Cole, to others as Adam Lewis, said nothing. He sat in silence, expression calm, eyes fixed on the wall as detectives tried every tactic they knew. They offered leniency. They appealed to his conscience. They showed him photographs: Lydia's blood-stained dress, Clara's missing poster, Grace's tearful video statement. He blinked once, then smiled faintly. "I told you," he said softly. "It was never just me." That line had haunted investigators from the moment they found it in his apartment. Now they realized it wasn't a metaphor. It was a clue. He wasn't working alone. Detectives revisited every phone call, every record, every email, and in one of his encrypted chats, buried beneath layers of deleted data, they found a familiar name: Melissa Crane, the same coworker who'd helped him drive the truck the night Lydia vanished. She had claimed she was threatened, but new evidence showed she'd stayed in touch with Daniel long after the murder. Money transfers, coded messages, plans. Melissa wasn't a victim. She was a partner. When she was arrested, she broke almost instantly. Tears streaming, she admitted that Daniel had manipulated her, but she also confessed to helping clean up after Lydia's death. She'd helped dispose of the body, staged the crime scene, and even helped Daniel create the fake identity he used to become Adam Lewis. It wasn't just a love triangle. It was a criminal partnership built on obsession, fear, and control. When Daniel was confronted with Melissa's confession, he finally leaned forward, hands clasped, and said something no one expected. "Melissa was never supposed to be there," he murmured. "She made it messy. Lydia didn't have to die." Detectives pressed him. "Then who killed Lydia?" Daniel smiled, slow, deliberate, and whispered, "Ask her where she buried the rest." The room went silent. Police immediately returned to Pine Lake, the place where Lydia's belongings were found. After hours of searching, cadaver dogs hit on a new spot deeper in the woods. What they uncovered froze even the most seasoned officers: a second grave. Inside were human remains belonging not to Lydia, but to Clara Jameson, the woman who vanished 8 years earlier. The pattern was complete, the truth undeniable. Daniel had used the same woman twice, Melissa to help hide both bodies while planning to erase her next. He didn't love anyone. He collected them. When officers told him that Clara had been found, he simply nodded and whispered, "Then I guess she finally stopped waiting." No remorse, no emotion, just cold satisfaction. In court, he refused to testify. Melissa, desperate to avoid a death sentence, told everything. How Daniel had planned Lydia's death for weeks, how he'd rehearsed his TV interviews, how he'd chosen Grace as his next project. The jury took less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. As Daniel was led from the courtroom, he turned to the cameras and said one last chilling line: "Love isn't the problem. People are." He was sentenced to life without parole. Melissa, 25 years. When the truth finally came to light,
The world stopped for a moment. What began as a dream wedding had turned into a nightmare that would echo through two families forever. Daniel's charm, Emma's love, and a secret that refused to stay buried. These were the ingredients of a tragedy that no one saw coming. Friends who once celebrated their love were now left asking the same haunting question. How could it end like this? Emma's face, once radiant with joy, was now cold, empty, and unrecognizable. Behind the veil of her perfect smile was a woman drowning in guilt, fear, and lies. The man she thought she knew, the man she was ready to marry, had been living two lives. And when truth collided with betrayal, only one of them would survive it. The murder shocked everyone, not just because it was brutal, but because it was personal. Love had turned into obsession, trust into manipulation, and a wedding into a crime scene. As detectives pieced the story together, one thing became clear. Evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it stands beside you in a wedding dress. Sometimes it smiles for the camera. The letters, the hidden affair, the jealousy, all of it led to a single devastating moment that ended two lives, one in the grave and the other behind bars. When the gavel fell in the courtroom, the sound was more than justice. It was the end of a twisted love story. Emma's tears couldn't bring back Daniel, and Daniel's secrets could no longer hurt anyone. But the scars remained. The families would never be the same. The wedding that never happened became a story told in whispers, a reminder of how quickly love can turn lethal. Love, when built on lies, becomes a weapon, and in the end, no one walks away clean. If this story gripped you, if it made you wonder how far people will go when love turns dark, then you belong here with us. Subscribe to Crime Vault, where we uncover the real stories, the hidden motives, and the truths too haunting to ignore. Because sometimes the most beautiful promises end in blood.